We have briefly discussed matter throughout the last couple weeks when we've been talking about energy flow throughout an ecosystem. Matter is just the amount of space something takes up, and that's constantly recycled. When something dies, it's decomposed and returned to the soil so it can be reused. However, energy, as it flows from one organism to the next, it cannot be recycled. It goes in and then comes out and it's done. It must come from another source. So with that being said, we are going to talk about matter moving throughout cycles in nature. We call these cycles biogeochemical cycles, and that is just moving certain chemicals throughout the living and non-living parts of an ecosystem. It's important to keep in mind that these cycles are all driven by the sun's energy and gravitational pull. So we will discuss the carbon cycle, the phosphorus cycle, nitrogen cycle, water cycle, and oxygen. The very first one is carbon. How does it move? Carbon is a molecule that makes up living things. It's essential to all living things. The carbon cycle will take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, send it through the food webs and food chains, and then return it to the atmosphere. So if you look at the diagram, carbon dioxide is put into the atmosphere by fossil fuels or volcanoes burning, and also by consumers. We exhale carbon dioxide. Plants and producers take that carbon dioxide in through the process of photosynthesis that you talked about last year and spit back out oxygen that we take in to then again release carbon dioxide. So here's a better image. Again, the carbon dioxide is put out into the atmosphere. The plants take in the carbon dioxide, run it through photosynthesis, and exhale oxygen. The water cycle. We know that water is essential to all organisms. Organisms have to have water so that they can carry out their chemical reactions. So another name for the water cycle is hydrologic. It means that it's a circular pathway for water on Earth. Water moves through the processes of evaporation, transpiration, condensation, precipitation, and then through surface and groundwater. Just a fun little fact, 97% of the water on Earth is contained in the oceans, 2% is in glaciers and the polar ice caps, and only 1% is in the lakes, rivers, and groundwater. So looking at the water cycle, precipitation falls and then is evaporated in the puddles that it falls in, and when it evaporates, it's kind of transpiring as well. Okay, the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen will be important when we get to talking about DNA and macromolecules. It's an important component of proteins and amino acids, as well as those nucleic acids that make up RNA and DNA. Nitrogen cycle isn't heard of very much because it mostly takes place underground. A process called nitrogen fixation is where bacteria take the nitrogen and turn it into ammonia, and so the ammonia can then be turned into nitrates, which are needed by plants. This is a very complex cycle. The parts that I want you to understand is when an organism is decomposed, it's returning that nitrogen back to the soil, so the nitrogen fixing bacteria can take it in and convert it back to the nitrate. So if you take a look at the image here, you have the bacteria The bacteria are converting the nitrogen into ammonia, and that ammonia will be sent to nitrogen fixing bacteria. It will then convert it to ammonium, and then decomposers will decompose the material, get the nitrogen by itself, and the process starts all over again. Phosphorus is another important element. It's required by all organisms. Again, it's important for the RNA and DNA that we will talk about later, as well as the cell membrane, which will be our next unit, and then ATP, or energy inside a cell. The phosphorus cycle either takes place at or below ground level. We have phosphate that will be released by different rocks that have gone through some weathering. They decompose, and that returns the phosphorus to the soil. The phosphorus then gets into the groundwater and is locked into different sediments. Mining and different agricultural practices add phosphorus into the environment based on the chemicals that they're using. If you are looking here at the image, you have the weathering of rocks, whether that is precipitation causing the weathering, but then your sediment becomes at the bottom of a stream, lake, pond, river, and then eventually builds, and you get to create a geologic uplifting. Okay, so how do we have an influence on these cycles that just naturally occur in nature? Well, we are often withdrawing water from lakes and streams, whether that be for a power plant, creating electricity and other ways. We are all the time clearing forests and fields for a place to plant crops and grow different forms of vegetation. We are filling in different wetland environments so that we can create shopping malls and roads. We're constantly burning fossil fuels as we drive our vehicles or when we burn wood. For agriculture practices, we're using insecticides and pesticides that then run off into our lakes, ponds, streams, and rivers. In addition, our runoff of animal waste and different sewage treatment, as well as those fertilizers we just talked about. Even the simple fact of driving down the road and throwing your McDonald's bag out the car window, that's a form of influencing these naturally occurring cycles. And any questions? Now's the time for questions.